We're thrilled to have another community session happening today. We are today actually now no longer Vibrant Practice. We're called Ultralight.
Mhm.
So we're the Ultralight community webinar series here continuing, and I'm really excited to have Leonard Pastrana, who is the founder of nuBioAge, and just a real expert voice in the very messy, tumultuous world of peptides. And so, yeah, really excited. Thanks for joining us, Leonard. Thanks for being a part of the conversation today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Great to be here. I think you described it pretty well in messy. There's more news coming out than ever before, but excited to be here and love your new name.
Oh,
I was just telling everybody, I've dealt with a lot of EHRs and there's this like heaviness feeling to it. And I think you guys have like the perfect name that helps people feel a little bit more comfortable with an EHR and all of its capabilities.
yeah, amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that. I loved
Mhm.
that came out for you right away too, because that's what we're
Yeah.
going for, which is great. So,
Mhm.
we are, we're gonna have a conversation today about really all things happening in this wild, crazy world of peptides. And the reason why I
Mhm.
invited Leonard to speak on this topic is because he has been in the space for a long time as an expert. He's a pharmacist, first of all, so really knows what he's talking about when
Mhm.
it comes to just where the space has been. And then, having founded nuBioAge now years ago, I think it was 2019, did you share?
Yep.
Yeah, 2019. So, you've really been seeing this whole evolution of peptides happening in the space for a long time. And you are faculty across A4M, across your own amazing conference that you guys put on that people really love, across SSRP. And you advise a number of other groups kind of at the forefront
Mhm.
of the space. And so you have I think just a lens of reality
Mhm.
of that's grounded, not kind of on either side of being like a total pessimist or total optimist, but really just the
Yeah.
reality of like where peptides sit. So help us understand, first of all, just
Mhm.
kind of where we are today and the kind of 60 second or 2 minute version of why is there so much happening in the space right now, and why are things moving so fast?
Yeah, things are moving so fast and it's almost like surreal for me to see because we started back in 2019 when I came across peptides and they were fascinating to me. But they weren't, there was a lot of medical practitioners using them, but it wasn't as popular in the mainstream as it is now. And I think it's, first of all, they were injectable. And I don't know if people can actually remember, but 6 years ago, people did not like injections. But with the advent of GLP-1s, everybody got very comfortable with subcutaneous injections because so many people are taking them. And I think that kind of opened the door to the conversation around peptides. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, I've been in longevity medicine. I've been in the formulation of supplements. I've seen trends come and go, and there's only certain things that stick, and they stick because they're actually working and they're actually doing amazing things for patients. And this is why I think you see the momentum when it comes to peptides now, because more and more people more open to the idea of peptides. And unfortunately, something that I think that happened that is counterintuitive is that the regulatory kind of clamped down on peptides. And instead of this actually slowing things down, it opened up this like arena of a super gray area, black market type use of peptides where it was no longer, I mean, when I first got started, it was medical practitioners, it was doctors that were treated complicated cases, right? And they were expert practitioners that were using out of the box tools, and they really had a deep understanding of cellular medicine and biochemistry, and they were utilizing peptides. And then it got more and more known, and then all of a sudden now we're in a space that they've created this gray black market area where now all of a sudden health coaches and just not even medical practitioners can engage in selling peptides online through multi-level marketing schemes and affiliate models. And so this is why I think you see mass confusion and this mass spread of the conversation around peptides. It's kind of accelerated counterintuitively because of the clampdown on some restrictions when it comes to peptide therapy.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, very counterintuitive, but I guess it just speaks to like these compounds are working and people want them. And so the market is trying to find ways, to kind of meet that need
Mm-hmm.
because there is a need. And so maybe let's go into a little bit of what your perspective of um like what's actually changed in the regulatory landscape in such a short window, and why have things changed? And kind of what's the what do practitioners today need to know
Mm-hmm.
about these changes?
Yeah, the hardest question to ask, I mean, to answer is the why, because there are so many moving parts. There are so many people at with incentives in this world, right? You have the pharmaceutical industry, right? You have GLP-1s, these companies, these multi-billion-dollar companies that can really influence the FDA and can really influence politicians in certain ways. You have compounding pharmacies. You have the FDA. You have so many kind of competing interests that the why behind things is really messy and really hard to kind of put your finger on as to why all these things are happening. Back in the earlier, like 2019, 2020, you would see an updated guidance from the FDA maybe every like 2 to 3 years. Like everybody knew it came out and everybody read it. And now you see an FDA guidance like every 3 months. Sometimes they're back to back. Sometimes they're coming out on the Super Bowl because there's a Super Bowl commercial about oral GLP-1s, and they want to make sure that HIMSS isn't going too far, right? And so it's like it's very confusing for a lot of people because you have companies like Eli Lilly coming out and saying, "Hey, we've done some testing on tirzepatide and combinations with B12, and they're not as potent, or there's issues with it." And then you have FDA coming out with guidance on telemedicine things, and so there's just so many things at play. So it's very complicated for physicians to understand what's happening. I would say maybe a couple of years ago, a lot of the peptides that were being used outside of GLP-1s were put on this category 2 list. And that's
Hmm.
where things really started to kind of take a turn. And that category 2 list is a list where they're deeming them to potentially be a safety risk. And that was really shocking, just from my experience as a pharmacist. They're one of the safer compounds that we see. I mean, they're not, obviously, it's a medication, so there's always side effects. But they kind of made this blanket statement about a lot of them, and now you have someone like RFK that's going on podcasts and saying, "Hey, these were improperly put on category 2. We're working really hard to take them off." And so by the time I say something or give somebody some advice next week, that might change,
Yeah,
so it's like
yeah.
very unfortunate. Usually I used to be able to say, "Hey, these are the laws, these are the rules, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do." And that changes so fast and so quickly that you just have to really be up to date on what's happening day to
Yeah,
day.
that's and so I think a lot of folks in the audience are clinicians who are either compound and peptide curious,
Mhm.
or are already kind of using it in their platforms today. Where do you think, you should stay up to date if you're a practitioner trying to how do you navigate through all the mess of group chats and conferences and what people are saying in social media? What can you recommend for practitioners to filter on what's credible versus what might be premature?
Yeah, I think where you can get some of your best advice is from having a really close personal relationship with your compounding pharmacy. Because your compounding pharmacy is up to date on everything. They have alerts on the latest when it comes to the FDA, and they also have alerts on what's happening latest when it comes to their state board, right? So something that's kind of confusing to some folks is that some states state board of pharmacies are coming in and they're taking a look at compounding pharmacies, and they're okay with some of the compounds that they're compounding, while you have other states that are much more restrictive. And you have some state boards of pharmacies like Ohio now that is going into med spas and looking in refrigerators and pulling out certain peptides and saying that these are dangerous compounds. And so you really have to know state by state what's happening. And there's nobody better that can keep you up to date on that than your compounding pharmacy.
Yeah.
Also, staying up to date education wise, right? So nuBioAge is one of the things that we try to stay as up to date with providers as to what is happening and what is changing. But it is more than FDA guidance. There's a lot of confusion because on a state to state level, they treat these things a little bit differently as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's a challenge. And I guess, when you're thinking about people who are maybe just getting started with compound, thinking about
Mm,
establishing a relationship with a compounding pharmacy, starting to
mm,
offer peptides within their practice, where do you suggest that they start?
mm.
How do you think about navigating the space and finding evaluating the right pharmacies even?
Yeah, I think, it's taking a look and making sure that you're dealing with a compounding pharmacy. I think that one of the things that is absolutely wild now that didn't happen until maybe like a year ago is that it is very confusing. I'm sorry to keep saying that, but you have certain companies that sell research grade peptides, right? That's not a compounding pharmacy. And
I,
they sound very similar to a compounding pharmacy. They'll send you emails and sales reps will say, hey, we are an FDA registered manufacturer, which is very confusing. You think, okay, here's a certificate of analysis, here's an FDA registered manufacturer, but it's for research purposes only, which means it's not technically for human consumption. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors are using those peptides right now, and they don't realize that they can find themselves in a lot of trouble. It wasn't being enforced, but recently there was just something in Utah, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. A Utah, I think it was an orthopedic doctor, got indicted for using research grade peptides. There was one in Arkansas. And so you have to be very careful with that. So make sure that you're using a 503A compounding pharmacy, first of all. And second, you want to really invest in education, right? You want to be surrounded around other medical practitioners, other doctors that have been utilizing these for a while in practice, and you want to be around those communities and around those environments because there's amazing doctors that have been doing this for over a decade that you really want to be learning from because right now with AI and with information the way that it's out there, so many people can sound like experts, and it's
Mhm.
literally just something that they are good at communicating with their audience. You want to find someone that's teaching you that is not only a great lecturer or not understands peptide therapy, but is actually treating patients themselves and has been doing it for a while. And that's kind of rare to find. And that's one of the things that we work really hard, especially when we throw educational events, when we throw conferences, is we make sure that our speakers are not only very knowledgeable and have been doing this for a while, but they're actually practicing medicine themselves. And they're talking about this from experience, not something that they looked up on ChatGPT recently that sounds really good.
Yeah, huge, huge. I mean, it's really hard to distinguish between who's an expert and who's not in the space. And partially, I think because there's still it's still so early. And so in terms of like kind of going to that idea of expertise, what data does exist today on the use of peptides? What data as a clinician can I be can I get comfortable with that
Mhm.
doesn't, or maybe is coming, and how should I think about the data around efficacy coming out?
Yeah, so it's not as great as we typically feel comfortable with, right? So it depends on where you're coming from, right? I'm a pharmacist. We tend to be a little bit more strict when it comes to data. If you've ever dealt with an annoying pharmacist at like CVS or Walgreens that refuses to fill your prescription because of an off-label use, pharmacists are inherently very safe. And when I came into this world, I was pretty shocked at the little amount of evidence that I was typically used to double-blind placebo-controlled trials, right? And so I would say that there's different levels, right? We have GLP-1s that obviously have as much data as you can imagine when it comes to that, and then you
Yeah.
start going into some of the other ones that still have been through phase 3 clinical trials, right? They have randomized controlled trials. They have been FDA approved, things like tesamorelin or things like that have had prior FDA approval, like samorelin, like some of the growth hormone peptides, where you can lean on phase 3 clinical trials and you can lean on evidence. And then there's other peptides that never necessarily got FDA approval, not necessarily because they weren't efficacious, or not necessarily because they weren't working. It's just it was an insurance issue, or that company just didn't have enough money to continue that research. Like a peptide that comes to mind is lorazepam that was studied in celiac patients that had tremendous outcomes when it came to gluten sensitivity and tight junctions and how it repairs the gut. And they just decided that it wasn't worth investing for something that wasn't going to pay off, like celiac disease, because there was a minimal amount of patients, right? And so this is where compounding came in and said, hey, we could actually use this compound for a lot of people, and it does
Mhm.
them, it does an amazing job, which I think is probably one of the most underutilized peptides out there. Something like lorazepam. So I have phase 3 clinical trials that I can lean on. There's even trials that it's been used in children, right? So I can feel very
Mhm.
comfortable in utilizing something like that, depending on what your risk tolerance is. Then you have other compounds that have been through approval process, just not in this country, like things like thymosin alpha 1 that has an impact on the immune system. And it's been studied in very critically ill patients
Mhm.
and with very little side effects. So you know that it's safe. And you know that it works in other indications for like cancer and hepatitis and things like that. But if you have a really good clinician that really understands something with a patient, they might be able to identify that this might be a good tool to use for short term for a specific use case. And so we have plenty of studies that we can lean on. And then you get into another tier of peptides like BPC 157 and some other ones that anecdotally, we see that they work for so many people, but we just do not have the human evidence to lean on. Like I can't and this is what I explain when I'm through a slide deck. I hate it when I can't point to human trials, right? I can only show you mechanistically what's happening and also from like my experience what's happening. And I'll tell you something, and this is where it gets weird, right? This is where it gets confusing, is that something like BPC 157, it was one of the first peptides I had heard about. And I was like, well, there's no human data for this. Like, what am we supposed to even point to when it comes to dosing? But once you see other people using it and how it helps them, it's really hard to unsee that.
Yeah,
And it's really hard to see someone coming with a certain type of injury or some type of gut issues, and you've seen it work so well, and it's hard not to tell a friend or a family member, like, hey, this is something that I've seen being used. I've seen it be very safe. It's hard to not recommend it. And that's like that slippery slope where you start going from like very critical to all of a sudden, like I understand why people use this. And it's not just from anecdotal from a couple of people that I've seen, it's from the data that we see in pharmacies, right? So one of the things that we see in pharmacies is that we see compliance. We see how often somebody's refilling something. So we see, spikes and trends come through the pharmacy, like if it's NAD or methylene blue, but there's some that they refill over and over and over again because we know that it's working. And like BPC 157 is one of those. Um,
interesting.
but but any clinician that comes to me and says, I just don't feel comfortable with that because of X issue or the fact that I don't have human data, I completely understand.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's just a matter of your decision on what you want to do.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I hadn't thought about like the data set you're seeing as a pharmacy, which is, yeah, this is super powerful. And there's something to just say about that. If there's adherence for a reason, if people are feeling it. And I think that's the interesting thing about the space is that, a lot of the availability of it is being driven, or the demand for it is being driven from patients and people who just want to feel better for whatever reason and are finding these compounds to actually help. But again, there's no kind of long-term, data yet. And so talk a little bit about what some of what's emerging as, while, for example, BPC 157
Mm,
seems to have a lot of impact immediately on helping people with, muscle issues or feel better with pain. There is also questions, right, around
mm,
some of the implications of what might happen if this kind of cell mechanism that
mm,
encourages cells to regenerate and reform might also trigger, things like higher potential for cancer or the wrong kinds of cells
mm.
to reform. So, is that something that how do you take that kind of risk into perspective when thinking about something like, BPC in particular, the long-term risk that we don't yet have data on?
Yeah, for sure. And I think about this a lot, not only in BPC, but growth hormone peptides, even non-peptides like things like NAD, and how we kind of approach this, right? And it's very personalized. So for instance, on growth hormone peptides, right? If someone had active cancer, we wouldn't want to be stimulating growth for a number of reasons. If you look at the literature, there's some growth hormone releasing peptides that show that it has like an anti-tumor effect, right? But we know mechanistically that we don't want to be doing something like that. So it's very personalized, right? If you have a patient with a history of cancer, or if your patient is seeing an oncologist, you really have to protect yourself, even if you don't
Mhm.
believe it's an issue. You have to be very, very careful with something like that. But that's the case in any scenario, right? So if we're worried about somebody having cancer or somebody having active cancer, there are a lot of things that we wouldn't do, right? That patient wouldn't supplement with like glutamine that could also, empower cancer cells, right? So we're always going to treat patients differently if they have active cancer or if we're worried about cancer. It's just another thing that we have to consider. I think the one thing that people don't talk about enough is that you have to be really great at understanding, pre-cancer screening, right? That's one thing that you don't hear anybody talking about in the longevity space is that are you doing all the appropriate screening tests at the appropriate age that you need to be, doing? And so that's one thing that I think providers need to pay close attention to. But something like, let's say, BPC, the reason that someone would come up with that with BPC is that it improves or it activates something called VEGF, or it improves angiogenesis or blood flow, which is something that we wouldn't want to do, of course, in an environment of a tumor. But if you look
Mhm.
at some of the data, it says, yes, it inhibits VEGF in certain scenarios, but then there's other papers that show with melanoma cells, right, where it actually inhibits VEGF in those scenarios, so that it's
Mhm.
not actually always activating VEGF, that it has a modulating effect on VEGF, right? Now, is that enough data for me to say, hey, no, it's just modulating VEGF, we don't have to worry about that? No, of course not. But I think this is another reason why a lot of peptides aren't used ongoing, and this is one of the things that really brought me to the space, or I was really interested when I first came in. Is that as a pharmacist, I'm used to, hey, we have a drug, it binds to a receptor, you're most likely taking this forever, and we also have to worry about drug-drug interactions and what other things are happening when it binds to that receptor. Peptides were the first time where I was really trying to understand the biochemistry or cell signaling around it, and where it had this modulating effect, right? And where it's something that you could help to improve cell efficiency, cell signaling for a short period of time, while you do all the other things like improving metabolism and diet and nutrition and exercise. And you can actually fix things, and just, it's not something you have to be on forever to get that effect. And so I think that screening is very important. I think it in context is very important. And I
Mhm.
think that, cycling these things is very important. It's not something that you have to be on forever. So there's so much to kind of discuss around it, but it's longevity medicine, right? It's very personalized to
Yeah.
the individual patient.
Makes sense. And I mean, that's sort of what interests us most also, coming from the space of just
Mm,
trying to enable more personalized medicine is to actually build the data sets and the understanding of like what's working for whom across things like this that do show promise. Are you seeing
mm,
any other kinds of or tell us a little bit about like where are these data sets being created today? Are
mm,
compounding pharmacies kind of creating this
mm,
understanding? Are other
mm,
groups where is this kind of research aggregating? I know like there's the
mm,
issue of, pharma has like a disincentive in some ways, right? To and they're the
mm.
ones who usually drive this kind of efficacy
Yeah.
understanding. But what's going to get us there to have a better understanding
Mm.
and more nuanced set of data?
Yeah, so there isn't going to be the funding to get the type of data that we're used to, right? Uh, that funding comes from something that has to be covered by insurance, typically approved for a disease state, right? So it's going to be a while before we can do that. And big pharma, if they find that there is a compound that's worth spending that money on, it's going to be most likely patented by them. And a lot of people like to say that peptides aren't patentable because they're natural. That's not true. If big
Mhm.
pharma can get that through FDA approval process, they will add something to it to make it patentable, right? So that's just like kind of a myth. Like if they're going to make money off of it, they'll find a way.
By the way.
Um, uh, but what's happening now is that I would say in the last year, I have never seen as much interest in what you're talking about, and many groups getting together to provide the type of data that you're talking about.
Mhm.
Usually, a lot of we hear a lot about it coming to nuBioAge through our scientific team, through how we can help with our network of doctors, and the requests coming in on safety data, on research, on how we can put together these data sets within different platforms. I've been in more meetings in the past 6 months about how that happens than in the previous 6 or 7 years. And so
Wow.
what I can tell you is that that is happening right now. There's a lot of groups organizing around getting this safety data. And we're coming up with those protocols right now and trying to understand, hey, what diagnostics do we want to take a look at? What type of diagnostics does thymosin alpha-1 impact? What type of things do we want to look around body composition, around other markers of longevity that we can be tracking, that we can put standard protocols together and we can leverage the
Yeah.
entire network of physicians that want to engage in that. And so that's all happening right now, but it's all grassroots from the bottom coming up. And it's exciting, but it is going to take some time. But this is the first time I see the difference between talking about it and it actually happening. And so
And
I think we're getting
that's great.
closer to that right now. But besides that, there's not much out there outside of personal experience, unfortunately.
That's really promising. I mean, I think the demand has to be driving, kind of getting to a better place with it. I do want to share for folks who are listening in, there is a Q&A feature, and so you can either raise your hand or you can drop a question in for Leonard to hit in the Q&A section. So feel free. We'll keep going, but would love to open it up and make sure we're hitting anything that people are curious about in the crowd here. Um, so as we think about maybe going back a little bit to like this kind of strange time we're in with so much changing so quickly, what do you think is behind, or I guess if you could, it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen regulatory wise, but if you could,
Yeah.
where do you think things are going? And with that sense of like how is that impacting how you and your team make decisions and how you think the space is going to evolve?
Yeah, so I learned a while back to stop making decisions based on peptide therapy and peptide therapy regulatory things, right? So peptide therapy is like this amazing tool in this bigger toolbox of longevity medicine. And so we think about longevity medicine, the application and delivery of longevity medicine in a different way. Like, how do we help doctors and medical practitioners actually deliver that longevity medicine? If it's education, if it's how we communicate to patients, if it's a better understanding of the regulatory, that's where we kind of live. Where I'm at right now with peptide therapy, where I see it going is that it's on a better path than we've ever seen before. When you have Health and Human Services and you have RFK talking about how they want to remove all these peptides from category two off of category two, right? And so there's two things that could happen. They can get removed from category two, which is nice because they shouldn't be there, or they can be put onto category one that really opens up the door and makes this to where every compounding pharmacy and other aspects of the industry can now engage in this. And this is going to be great for physicians. It's going to be great for patients because there's going to be a lot more competition. There's going to be a lot more standardization around it. I know one of the questions that they ask us a lot is around not just is the compound safe. We're pretty sure that is the case. It is, how is it going to be compounded, right? Like how
Mhm.
should we be testing the finished version of this? How can we standardize this and regulate this in a way that we know that good product is going out to patients? And I think all that is happening. And so if I was a physician right now, I would be preparing myself for that eventuality, in
Hmm.
that I would be very focused on having a really good understanding of the top five peptides. I think you don't have to go to 14 or 19 peptides. You can do so much with the top five peptides and understanding them really well. I think it's important, even if you feel like you can't use them yet as a physician. So many of your patients and future patients are now taking them or are
Mhm.
interested in them. And so you have to know how to talk to them about it and how to actually think about what else that they're taking. And so I think that the writing's on the wall, that is the future. And I think education is going to be the most important thing. And so I would be thinking a lot about education when it came to peptide therapy. But I think it's on the right road. And I think you're not going to hear less about it in the future. That's for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it. What are those top
Mm,
five? I think
mm.
we can guess, but what, from
Yeah.
your perspective, are the top five?
Yeah. So obviously GLP-1s, right? Everybody's probably sick about hearing about them. I'm a little bit not sick about them, but thinking about GLP-1s as a foundation for making all other therapies that much better, right?
Mm.
And there's this there's the buzzword around microdosing, which it's not necessarily microdosing. It's just the smallest effective dose to elicit the response that we want.
Hmm.
And I think that physicians in the longevity space, especially, are great at, hey, how can I use GLP-1s as this foundation, this platform that I'm not only helping people lose weight, but I'm improving their glucose and insulin dynamics, I'm improving their inflammation, and I'm creating the right environment for all my other recommendations to work that much better. I
Hmm.
think that is big. Is how you use GLP-1s and which GLP-1 you use in conjunction with other peptides. But I would say the next ones that I've seen in my experience make the biggest impact with providers. And I've seen some of the best, guru peptide providers prescribing peptides for a long time, and they'll go on to conferences and talk about 20 different peptides. But I can tell you, because I've seen what they've ordered, they order about five of them. And it is some version of the growth hormone peptides, right? So either sermorelin, CJC ipamorelin, or tesamorelin, right? It's very impactful. It's not just about growth hormone and muscle gaining. There's so many things that happen when it comes to cognitive function, when it comes to how well people recover from exercise, when it comes to sleep. I think that one's a one to really understand how to use. Of course, BPC 157, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data on it, but there's no other peptide that I've seen that makes a bigger difference. And it's not just BPC 157, but what you kind of combine it with and what you're using it for, right? There's
Mm.
combinations of BPC 157 and KPV that's more for gut health, or BPC 157 and thymosin beta 4 that's more for like tissue injury. So not just BPC 157, but like what you're combining with and how you're personalizing that treatment depending on the patient. The other ones are the thymosins, like thymosin alpha 1 and thymosin beta 4. Those I think make the biggest difference. And back in the day, we had MOTS-c that was a really fun peptide, but it seems like that one's harder to get. The other that's a mitochondrial peptide that really helped people exercise a lot better. But now the most interesting one is something called SS31. It's also a mitochondrial peptide that recently got FDA approval for a rare disease. But that one, especially in this post world of post-COVID and a lot of immune dysregulation, we see that using something like SS31 that actually works on the structure of mitochondria is very impactful. So I would say those. I'd throw lorazepam in there. I mean, everybody has some type of gluten sensitivity, food insensitivity because of environmental factors.
Mhm.
Everybody has leaky gut, or they have some issue with their tight junctions, and there's no other
Yeah.
peptide that literally repairs tight junctions like lorazepam. So I
Oh.
would say those are the top 5 to 6 that I you can do so much with those without getting into any of the fancier things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, that's super, super helpful framework to think about. And we're getting some questions in here, so I'll
Mm.
share part. Thanks for submitting one. When thinking about the importance of having personal experience or a close network of physicians who have experience in peptide therapy, what are some resources or groups for physicians currently
Mm.
interested in learning more? Are there meetups? Are there social media groups, et
Mm.
cetera?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places to go. One of the things that I focus on all year is that we have a yearly event called the Clinical Application of Longevity Medicine. It's a CALM conference. It's every year in February, and it's where we all come together. We have an entire scientific team. We have that's a cardiologist, pediatricians, family practice doctors that have been using peptides for a long time, and they have their own expertise in how they utilize them in different scenarios. And so Calm is where we come together once a year, and it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of have like that family community aspect of where we all kind of come together and learn and spend time together, not just during the lectures, but outside of the lectures. We all eat together, we all plan something after. So that's one place. We try to keep that going on throughout the year, right? So
Mm.
one of the things that we created was something called Nucleus, where we have webinars like every 2 weeks, where we bring our scientific team on, and we either go through an old lecture, or we do case studies or Q&As where you get to pick the brain of some of these practitioners that have been doing this every day. Because I think that's the most important part. A lot of us are getting information that we're just reading, which is great, but I'm telling you, like the AI issue is an issue, because I put a
Yeah.
lot of faculty together, and I review a lot of lectures, and I have to go through the slides because it's impacting even people that teach. Um, because there's certain people that read every paper on peptide therapy before um before AI. And if you've read every paper on like certain compounds and peptide therapy and you start asking AI questions, it's scary what it'll tell you. You know, it'll make things up still to this day. And I'm constantly fighting with ChatGPT and just like, no,
Yeah.
that's not true. You know, like reference the paper. That's not that's a stretch. Um, sorry, I went off kind of
No, that's, I mean,
in
but
a tangent, but
that's kind of a interesting and really challenging reality, right? Like where, what do you look at in order to know that that is or isn't correct? Like, how can you discern that?
well, you know, you have to have read a lot of this stuff before to kind of catch it. You know, I'll just give you some examples where um, I read every paper on a certain peptide, and it says, "Oh, this improves nitric oxide synthase, right? It improves, you know, blood flow or nitric oxide." And I'm like, I've never seen that. I would know to list that if I've seen that before. I'm like, give me the paper. And then it tells you, well, technically it doesn't say it, but it indirectly does it because it works in the mitochondria here. And that seems like a small little thing, but all those little mini lies compound
Hmm.
on it. And AI is getting a little bit better, but something that I do if I'm ever trying to use AI to organize my thoughts or organize some of my research is to give it a lot of instructions about, you know, if you're going to make a claim on something, I need you to reference the paper and I need you to give me exactly the phrase in the paper because then it can't kind of like hallucinate. And even when we create lectures, I'll create lectures or I'll get lectures from my scientific team and I will put it through AI and say, hey, I want to know if there's any inaccuracies in here, if there's anything that was um, not embellished, but is kind of like a stretch.
Hmm.
Are we over amplifying something here? And what's flat out wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then just kind of have the conversation back and forth about it. And so it's tougher. It's like we have more information ever before, but you have to kind of be careful with it. But you know, that's what we do in Nucleus is you want to have conversations with people that are actually doing it every day. Um, and so that's those are two places that you can go to kind of be part of that community and just
That's
have
great.
constant access. Because the worst thing I've made certification courses on peptides before, and one thing that I can't stand about them is that the second I'm done with them, I'm like, some new
Still.
paper comes out, and I'm like, oh no, this
Yeah.
belongs in that module. And so we decided, hey, we're going to stop creating certification courses, and we have a lot of education, but we're just going to have ongoing conversations as studies come out, as new ideas come out, inviting new speakers to just let's talk about it.
That was actually going to be my question is, are there any certifications you would recommend? So thanks
Hmm.
for front running that. That makes tons of sense that it's just changing so fast that to get certified means you're kind of stale in what happened yesterday, but not what's happening now. So
Yeah.
that's super interesting. Okay, one more from Olivier. With the Category 1 reinstatement, how are compliant operators structuring physician oversight to stay defensible? And what does best practice actually look like right now?
Okay, so if I can understand the question, it's with the Category 1 reinstatement, how are compliant operators structuring physician oversight to stay defensible? Now, I'm not sure if I understand the question
Yeah.
perfectly, but if they do go to Category 1, that really fixes a lot of the defensible type of issues because they are on Category 1. That means that they are allowed to be compounded, and so that even small bit of gray area would be completely gone, right? When it comes to staying defensible, and this is one of the things that we were thinking about adding to Nucleus, is that um, you know what happens in your note, right? And having a list of different peptides as to you know the studies on why you decided to use a peptide for a specific use case, right? And having a list of all the human studies and all the reasoning behind why you're making the decision that you're making. Um, and I think that's what keeps you as safe as possible, as well as uh, you know all the other documentation that you need. So if that's the question, I think but I'm not sure if I have the question right. What do you think? Do you think that's what it's asking?
That's what I'm getting from it too. I don't know if Olivia wants to add any clarification
Mm,
to the question. If
mm,
yeah, you're still there, but
mm.
that is what I'm understanding from it too. I guess maybe related to that. What do you think is going to change in, in the compounding landscape as things move from category two to category one? Like I guess you just hit on it, things become a lot more widely available, a lot more competitive in terms of what everybody's offering. Like how should I go about picking a compounding pharmacy? Now, if everybody probably will have kind of similar things, is that kind of what I
Mhm.
should expect? Is that most compounding pharmacies will now kind of have a similar offering. And so it's just about like what defines a good relationship then?
Yeah, and this is something that I'm very interested in understanding once it comes out because what's going to happen is that when they go and vote on these things, I think what they're going to do, my intuition is that they are going to not only say, hey, this is on category one, but they're going to come out with a lot of guidance on how these are compounded and how they're third party tested. And that, depending on what comes out there, that might eliminate a lot of compounding pharmacies because they're just too small or they do not have the money to invest in the testing that's going to be required. So I think that's kind of up to for
Interesting.
to see what happens because I think that they're not going to just go on to one. They're going to go on to the category one with an explanation of how you're going about standardizing how we test these things, third party testing,
Yeah.
where you're getting the active pharmaceutical ingredient from, and that may or may not that may be I have a feeling that they're going to be pretty strict with it, and only some pharmacies might be able to financially be able to do that type of testing. Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting. That's really
but
good.
that's just my guess.
Yeah.
That's just my crystal ball. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe it's not like that, but
Yeah, your guess is as good as any right now.
mm,
What's going to happen with all of these folks who are doing kind of research based or kind of the
mm.
research only accessible compounds, like you said? Are these what's where are they? How are they thinking about their businesses today? I mean, knowing that you're not them, but and what's gonna happen to these folks?
I don't know. I think that they're just going to always exist, honestly. I think that there's so many of them. There's so many different affiliates under each one. I think that technically the manufacturers, I mean, they obviously have great legal teams, right? They've structured things appropriately. They have a manufacturer that says, "Hey, I put for research only on the vial. I'm good. I'm not even under the FDA's, radar because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do." And then you have these third party companies that are saying they're the ones out there selling it. And so that if something happens, everybody's kind of pointing the finger at each other. And
Yeah.
I think the demand from patients is so much um, that I don't think it'll ever kind of go away. We saw one big company go away, but I think that was just one company out of hundreds, if not thousands, that are out there. So I think it'll always exist. And people just have to, everybody has their own risk tolerance on everybody's
Yeah.
a grown up. They can make their own decision. We can put them up the best information out there. I think where most of the conversation goes is to quality. And we try to scare people away from it with quality. And
Mhm.
yes, that is a big issue. You're injecting something into your body. But for physicians, at least, quality is a big issue, of course, but you have a bigger issue, which is your license, which is
Mhm.
if something does happen, and it might not even be related to the peptide. Peptides are pretty safe, but if somebody has a bad reaction, or they fall down, or they have a bad reaction to something else that they're taking from another doctor, and someone comes and says this happened from what you prescribed me, and you have to go up and you have to show somebody that you were using for not for human consumption research peptide, it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of that. And so you have to, as a physician, you have to stay away from it. Patients
Yeah.
that are out there making their own decisions, like, you know, what are you going
That
to do?
that's it. So I remember hearing somebody talk, I think at a session that we were both at, who
Mhm.
was I believe a legal voice, sharing how the sort of research only approach is okay when you have the right agreements and kind of methods in place for patients to acknowledge the risk that they're taking on as well. But it sounds like there's gray area there. You're still putting your license on the line, and yeah,
Yeah,
what's
I was surprised at that, to be honest with you. I
yeah.
was surprised when I heard that, and At that point, there was no, you didn't have anything in the news. But for instance, when we heard that, I hadn't seen any indictments yet. I've seen two since, right?
Yeah.
And so logically, that that thought process was like they're not enforcing it, so you could do these things to help yourself out. Recently, I got an email from a research peptide site like a couple of days ago, and it said, "Hey, we're FDA registered manufacturer. We have certificates of analysis." They copied the certificate of analysis. They sent it to me, and I said, "Is this a research peptide company?" And they responded, "Well, aren't all research all peptides kind of research anyway? We are." And they started talking about their quality. And then I responded and said, "Well, I just saw this doctor get indicted, and I just saw this happen. I just want to make sure that I'm safe if I'm prescribing these things." And then they gave me a really great, like believable email back about how they only give it to doctors that are in research. It's like doctors and clinics are not in research. You have
Yeah.
patients that you're prescribing stuff. Like you're not doing
That's not
research.
research.
They're
Yeah.
protecting themselves by saying, "Hey, we give this to people that are interested in research." So that,
Hmm.
now they don't have any liability.
Hmm.
But everybody's putting the liability on you.
Yeah.
And it's hard because they see all of their other practices doing it and not having an issue and making a lot of money from it. But I think that's why they all do it. They're all kind of just, well, everybody else is doing it. Why don't I just do it? But I think you'll see more and more of that.
Yeah.
It's just risk tolerance, I guess, at the end of the day, as to what you kind of want to do.
Yeah, across the board, right? It's like risk tolerance
Yeah.
for patients who, are using these compounds with the understanding of what it will, will the benefit outweigh kind of their own personal risk for them, and then same with clinicians. So it seems like, yeah, just in order to make the right calls, it just means you have to be super informed with as much information as you can that's trustworthy and believable.
Yeah. It's a fast moving industry.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions, feel free to share. It seems like we've kind of worked through the questions. And I think
Hmm.
that was that was a wonderful overview and a lot to process, but also just really helpful to hear even from your perspective of someone who's so
Hmm.
deeply ingrained in the space that it's just there is a lot of noise and it's hard to, it's objectively hard and finding your tribe and people who are kind of just like sharing information from high trusted sources is the best thing that people can be doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, the reason that we're like having this conversation right now, and from my experience, I have seen peptides change people's lives.
Yeah.
And that's why we're at this moment. That's why we're having this conversation when we typically, as medical providers, medical practitioners, we wouldn't have this conversation with this limited data set. But the reason that we are is because it's changing people's lives, and you cannot ignore that.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And so there's a conundrum we're in right now with like the amount of time it takes to get that evidence base, that efficacy, but also knowing that, as a patient, I don't want to wait 20 years until something has that proof if this is a pain point I'm having right now. And so it is a very interesting time indeed. Well, thank you, Leonard. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being a part of the Ultralight community conversation, and look forward to more intersections with your community.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care. Thanks everyone for tuning
Thanks.
in. Cheers.